Hi, everybody. I'm Charles Bass from the USD Alumni Association, and it's wonderful to welcome so many alumni, faculty, students, and friends to this presentation, which is part of the Alumni Association's ongoing digital engagement efforts. And to learn more about those programs, please visit alumni.sandiego.edu. We are very happy to have you join us for Climate Change Education and Social Justice, or How We Can All Care for Our Common Home. Our presenter today is the one and only Michel Boudrias. He is an associate professor of environmental and ocean sciences at USD and has been at USD since 1996. A few of his very first classmates are here with us today. He teaches courses in marine biology, environmental issues, sustainability, and coastal environmental science. His primary research area focuses on long-term ecological studies of shallow water coastal habitats impacted by human activities, both in San Diego and in developing countries. Since 2010, he has been the principal investigator on 2 prestigious National Science Foundation grants dedicated to climate change education for decision makers and key influential leaders. He leads Climate Education Partners, which is dedicated to informing San Diego and the nation about the impacts of climate change and how we can work together to find creative solutions to maintain our quality of life for future generations. And you can visit sandiego.edu/climate to learn more, and we'll be sure to include that link in our follow-up email. Michel was department chair for 10 years, leading the transformation of the department, positioning it as a key player in field-based and applied undergraduate research, integration of courses across multiple disciplines, and sustainability efforts at the University of San Diego. He's recently been named the director of the Care for Our Common Home pathway, supporting the University of San Diego's Envisioning 2024 strategic plan. Please welcome Dr. Michel Boudrias.
Well, it's so nice to see some friendly faces and people from my deep, dark past. In fact, Charles, I started teaching part-time in 1992, which is the first time I taught. I was 96 is when I started as a full-time faculty member. And as many of you know, I am dedicated to USD. It's a place I love, and it's a place I want to continue to make better before I decide to leave. I'm not leaving yet. I'm still going to create trouble for a few more years to come. So what I'd like to do today is actually talk to you about a few different things, about the project itself that we worked on, working on climate change education, about what's been going on campus in the last few years. There may be some of you who were on the periphery of how some of these things were happening. And when you talked about the work on marine pollution, there's some faces popping up who are deeply engaged in some of that for several years. And so this is something that's very important to us on campus and important to them as they went through their time at USD, and it was supported by some of the alums on this page as well. And what I want to finish up with is kind of our vision for the future. Where are we going with Care for the Common Home? What could really distinguish USD moving us forward? And I really think there's a lot that could be said about where USD can go. So I'm going to share my screen with you and start the presentation. If you want to help me grade some of my papers, I've got some of those available as well. If you're interested, but I'll think you don't want to do that. So as Charles mentioned, today we're going to talk about climate change education and social justice as an undercurrent of how we can all together work to take care of our common home. So those of you who know me know that I've had the pleasure of working in several wonderful locations. Those of you who don't can now be jealous of the fact that I went to work in so many wonderful locations. Dr. Bonder and I worked for many years, and our lab motto was saving the world one tropical location at a time. And therefore, here's some of the work we had to do. But so based on that, you might think that the superhero that really inspires me the most would be Aquaman, as I protect the oceans and work with that. And that is clearly part of who I am and what I do. But in fact, it's a much broader perspective. And I think Captain Planet is a much more representative superhero for me, because I think I've been working with many of you and many others to work on the planet. But more recently, I think what's really inspired me and inspired USD is the work of Pope Francis, because Laudato Si' that came out 5 years ago with the subtitle of Care for a Common Home really put together the impacts of what we really need to do to have a better planet for everyone. I like to boil down his three messages to climate change is real and it's happening. It's disproportionately affecting disadvantaged people around the world, and we must work together to come up with solutions and make the world a better place. And to me, that's a very good description of who we are and what we do at USD. So let's show you what I've been doing for the last 10 years or so. So 3 acts. This is for you, Ali. It's a play with 3 acts to make sure we know we have some components there. So first, I'll talk about CEP, the Climate Education Partner Project that I worked on with several colleagues. Then what we've been doing on campus, both in academic and operational perspectives, to really lock in some of the sustainability efforts, and finally, care for a common home. So in 2008, the National Science Foundation, NOAA, and NASA realized that there was a lot of efforts in the country on climate change science, even some in climate change education, but the efforts really weren't advancing the discussion. So they put a request for a proposal out to ask for something different, to ask for groups of people to come at this from a different perspective. And the teams required climate scientists, educators, and practitioners. And so 4 of us at USD, Scott Enners and Nilmini Silvasen from EPIC, connected to the law school, and John Yin and myself in the Environmental and Ocean Sciences Department got together, proposed to put together a team and a project to look at climate science education, but to focus it on decision makers and community leaders and business leaders. So we applied for the first phase of funding, which we received in 2010. To put in perspective, 130 groups from around the country applied. Only 15 got funded. We were one of those 15. And I will proudly say we beat out Stanford, UCLA, Berkeley, UCSD, and San Diego State. I bring that out not only because it's a moment of pride, but I bring that out because it showed what we did was different. We just didn't put a bunch of specialists together on a team. We carefully constructed the team the way you would think about the interdisciplinary efforts we do at USD. We brought in the right kinds of partners, and that's part of the reason why our project was so well evaluated. So we got started for 2 years. That included some pilot projects and a strategic plan of how to move forward. 30 faculties, 30 groups applied for the second phase of funding, which we were only one of 6 to receive, the only one on the West Coast, the only one focused on working with decision makers. And at the time, this grant was the largest we had received at USD. Combined, these 2 grants were $6.25 million of funding for USD, our students, and our partners. Move forward a few years as President Harris started the work on Envision 2024, and I was invited to be part of the steering committee, in part because I'm so quiet and have no opinions and no one's allowed to dispute that on the room. I was asked to be there as someone who had been working on sustainability for 10 years on campus. I'm very proud that I was asked to be part of the team. And with Michael Lovett-Collier, we were the co-chairs of the Care for the Common Home pathway that connected sustainability, social justice, and our efforts in climate change. And as of September of 2019, I was named as the KID director for the Care for the Common Home pathway, putting in some more energy and some more passion and some more work with my colleagues on campus. First, Climate Education Partner is a group that we put together to focus on what needed to be done to reach decision makers. Now, I want to point out that if you're used to USD presentations, you will notice I am not using the USD template. And I'm doing that because we did research on the colors, the framing, the font, the whole concept of how to put together a presentation that would connect you more deeply to climate change. So you will see a lot of greens and teals and blues to make you think subconsciously or maybe consciously about the planet. And if you know me, you know that I'm wearing a teal shirt because that's important as well. So even I dress up with the colors of the planet when it's time to present on climate education. So the font, the messaging, and all of that is something we put a lot of effort in. Who's we? We includes 4 faculty from the University of San Diego that I mentioned previously. We had 2 colleagues in social psychology, particularly environmental psychology. They were both at Cal State San Marcos at first. One then moved on to UCSF. We had a high-end climate scientist from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, And then our practitioner partners were from the San Diego Foundation, working already with business leaders. At the time, Emily Young was the director of their environmental group. We are so lucky now that Emily is part of the University of San Diego. She's the director of the nonprofit Institute in Souls, and has actually taken over some of the maintenance of this projects over time. We also brought in the Steve Alexander group. Steve is a well-known facilitator and strategic communications specialist, and that was part of the reason our team was different, because we had to work in a different space to be able to communicate to decision makers. Our project was one of 6 that were done nationally, and I'm just going to go over them very quickly. The Polar Partnership was at Columbia and focused primarily on impacts in the Arctic, and in particular with transitions in the Arctic. The CUSP project was in the East Coast, working particularly with the communities themselves. It was a community up level of work in education. Gnocchi was focused, it was not the Italian pasta, was actually focused on working with zoos and aquariums. Pacific Island Climate Education worked with all the American and American related islands throughout the Pacific, working especially on climate change education for middle schoolers, and Made Clear was working particularly with teachers that teach middle school and high school. So how do we do this? Our group is different. You know, putting a class together for our students, putting a class together for K through 12 is something that as teachers we can do relatively easily, but putting together an educational campaign for the people who are decision makers is a little bit more challenging and needs to be approached very differently. And for those of you who are locals, or those of you who live here long enough, you're going to recognize a lot of the people in our imagery as well. So we really focused on getting people that were highly recognized. If I quickly go through on this page, since we have some friends of USD on this photo, we have Maureen Stapleton and Alice, who is the Farm Bureau and the Water Quality District. Ron Roberts, one of the county supervisors, and then transportation specialists. Current mayor Kevin Faulkner, at the time past interim mayor Todd Gloria, potentially future mayor Todd Gloria, and USD alum, and Gal Robinson from the convention center. So when you think of San Diego, and what you miss if you're not here anymore, is this iconic vision of our connection to the outside world, a vision of surfing, the beach, the mountains. And it's very clear that in San Diego, we have a very strong connection to the environment as a natural place for us to be, as part of our quality of life. But this quality of life is being threatened by climate change. And this is one of my favorite photos, because this is at the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club. This was a meeting of the Southwest Regional Sea Level Rise Task Force, and their meeting was flooded by sea level rise as the waves and winter storms crashed over the barrier and into the meeting room. This is a real thing happening to San Diego County. It's happening to our buildings and our tourism along the coast. It's happening with our heat waves, and we need to do something about it. And we need to do it because we need to make sure that the quality of life for future generations will be there. And we want to focus on this in a total apolitical way. This is a need for quality of life and a way of responding to climate change. Is for everybody, no matter your age, your political disposition, where you work, what you do. What's interesting in San Diego County is we actually have a lot of support. We did 3 public opinion polls during the time of our project. They were actually done with a pair of public opinion companies, both a Republican and Democratic company, to make sure that our polls were as neutral as possible. And 84% of people in San Diego County agreed that climate change was a problem and affecting them or their region. That is about 15% more than the national average at the time. It's gone up a bit in the country, but we're still about 10% higher than the average response of counties around the country. And the number one concern was future generation. Of all the ones we listed as potential concern we're concerned for the kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews. By the way, ocean was number 4 of the concerns, and personal safety was actually number 6 or 7. So it's really about the future that we're concerned about. The other great thing about San Diego County is that we do not see the dichotomy between can we have a strong economy or a healthy environment. More than 3/4 of the business leaders interviewed and the community leaders in the county believe that we can have both, that we can actually have a healthy economy and a healthy environment. And in fact, it is one of the leaders one of the reasons why we are the leaders in clean tech and blue tech, and really looking at finding solutions to climate change rather than fighting the fact that we need to deal with it. The most fascinating bit of information we learned in the first phase of our project, and really what became the goal for us to create the resources to find solutions, was when we interviewed the leaders of San Diego County. We interviewed 40 people the first time and asked them, are you personally concerned about climate change? 90% of our leaders said they were. Now, remember, this is even higher than the general public. This is a group of leaders, many of whom may be viewed as more politically or fiscally conservative, and yet they were all very concerned about climate change. However, if we asked them, are your peers concerned about climate change? The answer flipped completely. Only 10% of them thought that peers were concerned about climate change. And we take this to be a fact that climate change is a topic you don't talk about. Like sex, politics, and religion at the dinner table, climate change is such a topic that leads to problems that they were not discussing it, meaning that they themselves or their company was doing something, but they didn't think their peers and competitors were. So this really was the piece that we had to work on to make sure they realized that they were part of a community that could do something. So in addition to that, we can show them that there's a lot of leadership in San Diego County. The 19 cities have a greenhouse gas inventory. At least 18 cities now have a climate action plan. The city of Chula Vista has won national awards. The port has won national awards. The airport is now winning important awards. We have many universities working on this. And at USD right now, we have the Climate Collaborative, which connects agencies, governments, and academia, and the Equinox Center, which is a dashboard telling us about quality of life in San Diego County. There's a lot of people in the San Diego region as a whole, and a lot of people at USD that are leaders in the space. So we know that San Diego is the place to really come up with a plan to take care of solutions for climate change. The first and core resource of our project was the report called San Diego 2050 is Calling, Who Will Answer, with a subtitle of How Can Science Help Prepare the Leaders? This, by the way, as a lesson in process for those of you out there, especially since you're coming from so many different disciplines, this was a lesson of how to put this together. This was not a science report we were putting together, but a science communication report. And so we had to make sure that the communication was clear, hence the bold question of what are you going to do about it, but that the fact that it was foundationally set up with science, hence how the science can work on it together. And when we put the report, we made sure that the report was focused on our audience. So our audience was these leaders in San Diego County. So in addition to the ones I showed you above, we have former mayor, former police chief, and now Chamber of Commerce, Jerry Sanders. We have the person who was in charge of the Red Cross, the mayor of Chula Vista at the time, a port commissioner, and a congressperson. We had really the leaders of the county. Interestingly enough, we had leaders who did not want to be on the report. We said, okay, we put the report out, it became very popular, and then we kept getting phone calls saying, can I be on the next report? Can I make sure I'm there as well? Because clearly our leaders want to be the ones saying that something is going on. This report is unlike any others out there in the framing concept in the world of climate change education for a few reasons. First, we focused on local and regional climate change. Now, we're not the only ones doing that, but by actually having Scripps as our partner, we were able to talk about global warming in the East County, global warming in North County, not California, but actually within a scale of a few kilometers around your house. So you can really see that it's about you and about the people around you. We used infographics, which is a big change for scientists. How do we communicate the science is not necessarily the way we do it to other scientists. So how do we use better communication techniques to get the information across? We couched everything in social psychology, giving you a reason to respond and something to do. And we found that this three-part approach, I can do something about it, it's part of who I am. In fact, it's deeply part of my value system to want to do something, increased our response and our connections. And then we focused exclusively on our community leaders, on our key influentials, as we call them. A community leader could be a CEO of a company. It could be an elected official. It could be Madres de Familia in Chula Vista that's working on the problem. It could be a faith-based leader, a tribal leader. It's someone that has a way of getting the rest of their community to get engaged. And finally, and maybe more importantly, it's about opportunities and hope. The science of climate change is depressing. The things are bad. The conditions are not positive. We need to get you that as the foundation, but what we need to do is give you hope and ideas of what you can do about it rather than just listen to the negative aspects of it. So this was a whole way of reframing the whole discussion. There were multiple generations of people involved. This is all people who are Scripps Institutions of Oceanography graduates, including myself. You have 5 generations of people from Scripps that have been working on this aspect. So we want to point out that this is grounded in the top science that we have in the area, right? The facts had to be set up in such a way that people could understand them. Smart people can understand them and use them. So of course, we don't use degrees centigrade when we talk to the general public. We use things that make it simple and clean. So if we can point out, for example, that we expect by 2050 that the temperature will be approximately 5 degrees warmer than it is now. We expect to have fewer rainy days, which sounds good, but we know that's not that good, but 8% more floods. So when it rains, it's going to be a problem. Those of you who are local may recall that about 4 summers ago, we had this massive rainstorm in July. And on a 2-day weekend, we had 2 inches of rain in San Diego County, 4 inches of rain in Ramona. That rainfall alone was the equivalent of 100 years of rainfall previous to that during that weekend. So this is what we mean by these floods occurring. And by the way, temperature and precipitation are really the driving factors to all the changes. But for example, if we talk about sea level rise, we focus much more on coastal flooding, which is really what's going to affect you so much. And so we expect, for example, about 1 foot of sea level rise in San Diego County by 2050. But it's not just the sea level rise itself that's the issue. It's the fact that if you add that to the El Nino storms and the winter storms, a lot of coastal infrastructure will be impacted. And then I reminded you that we talked about social psychology. What we found was that if we just gave them more and more knowledge, we only got some positive engagement. But the more we gave them knowledge plus efficacy, identity, and values, our engagement increased in all the work that we did. The report was set up as a balance of science and leaders. Each topic had some scientific information. Each topic was color-coded. Each topic had a logo to connect to it. So with water, a statement, 3 or 4 bullet points, a statement from a scientist, and some infographics to make the message get across, balanced on the other page by the leaders that deal with water in San Diego County, talking about how important it is, talking about how they need to do something. And, you know, having the Regional Water Quality Control Board involved and the Farm Bureau says that this is everybody that's involved in the impacts of water in the county, right? We also just didn't talk. We did a few of these kinds of lectures I'm doing now, but we did these climate tours as well. We brought people to the locations. This is our water tour. We did a wildfire tour working with SDG&E. We did a high tide breakfast at the Marine Room. For those of you who've had the pleasure of doing those, you know how spectacular that is. We picked the highest high tide possible. The waves were to the top of the windows at the Marine Room. The windows were rattling, and we had every mayor and deputy mayor of San Diego County. It kind of drove home the point of what sea level rise and coastal flooding can do, right? And then the last bit of our package is what we can do. That's why I call it sharing potential recipes. It's things that you can do as an individual, things your corporation can do, things your university can do. So we're giving you some suggestions of solutions. So it's not just, this is what's happening. Yes, it's important, but what can you do? Can you change your landscaping? Can you find more efficient ways to do watering? Can you take into account climate change and decide what kind of plants and water systems you want to use on campus, what appliances to buy when you're a university or a corporation? So, did it work? Well, 5 years later, we asked the same question we'd asked at the beginning. If you recall, 90% said they were concerned and 10% said their colleagues weren't concerned. We refined the question a little bit. And if you look at this, 87% of the leaders, and now we interviewed about 120 leaders, 87% said they were concerned or somewhat concerned about climate change, and 77% said that their colleagues are concerned. So the way we did the work is we not only brought these leaders together, but we also had some of the leaders present. So at the meeting for sea level rise, We had mayors and deputy mayors talk to their colleagues, talk to their peers. You know, if the city of Chula Vista on the border as a poor city wins an award and says we can do something, it's really hard for the mayor of La Jolla and Solana Beach to say we can't do anything. And so this social fabric really helped increase the work that we were doing. Okay, so that was our project. And in a nutshell, what it says is climate change is happening. We need to do something about it. We need to work together, and we need to do it for the future. And this is, I think, a message we can use in everything we do in this space. So what are we doing on campus? Well, I know some of you, even on this call, teach about people, planet, and profits, or bring in the connection between environmental, social, and economic perspectives for sustainability. We do it in the arts now, and we're hoping to do this more. We're doing it in the sciences. We're doing it in engineering. If we look at it in a different way on campus, climate change and the impacts are affecting peace and war around the world. I think it's pretty clear it's affecting public health. As we live it through right now, it's affecting environmental and social justice. And really what it comes down to is we need to deal with science, politics, and money. We can't just take one of these approaches. And so the message for the project was clearly that. The message for our teaching on campus needs to be the same. So I like using this figure not to blow you away with the details, but really with the concept. If you look in the center two boxes in gray and in blue, that's the science of climate change, right? That's greenhouse gases and carbon emissions and global warming, changes in temperature, impacts on ice caps. What I really want to drive home with this image is if you look at the orange box and the red box, that's the human piece of climate change. In yellow on one side, the activities that we do that contribute to climate change. And on the right side, where you have the red, is what's happening to people. Casualties, increased disasters, famine, environmental refugees. And I'd like to remind us on campuses, that's just not environmental refugees in countries far away. We have had USD students and alums who have been affected as environmental refugees, who had family in Louisiana where their land disappeared. There are environmental refugees in the US affected by climate change. And so we really need to prepare for this, be ready for this, and respond. So how does the campus respond? Well, the campus is doing this more and more as we integrate climate change and sustainability across USD. I know there's a few of my colleagues doing that in their classes on this call. And really what we're pushing more and more is framing it as something called campus as a living lab. And I know many of the students on this call have had the pleasure of doing the hands-on real world experience that makes the difference in your education. We want to make this happen more and more on campus. It means we can even solve the problems of campus if we have our classes working on those issues. So if we talk about temperature and precipitation, right, can we come up with solutions in designing our buildings and doing irrigation on campus and using water that's going to respond to it by bringing in engineering students and environmental studies students and communication students to tell the story and business students to do the analysis, right? How can we deal with sea level rise? You know, people might go, well, campus is fine, we're up on a hill, and sea level rise is not going to flood the campus, but a lot of you lived at the beach and it's going to flood where you live, and if you can't leave the beach to come to campus, if the roads are closed, this can affect it. If our supply chain is cut off because the companies we work with can't get to campus. And so how do we think about that? How do we deal with those situations? Wildfires have increased in Southern California, Australia, you've seen this. We had it happen. Some of you were probably on campus when we had the two major wildfires that affected San Diego, right? So how do we design our campus? How do we work with communities to be better prepared for these things? Does the campus become a place where people can come stay if there's a wildfire? How does our nursing school get involved in dealing with the injuries that come out of all of this? The other one that people don't always think about is how do we connect to what some people would call ecosystem services, but really, what are the benefits we get from nature, right? Protecting our wetlands that help with water purification, keeping trees on campus or around the community in order to regulate temperature and filtration, you know, having green roofs, working with the city to have more trees in Linda Vista, more cool zones to keep things to work for people. Where does our food come from? Can we work with more local food, right? And how do we actually go outside in a safe way when there may be heat waves? So there's a lot of ways for us to think about how we as students, or you as students, we as faculty, and we as USD can come up with solutions in these spaces. And then public health, which I think is so at the forefront of our mind right now. But for example, the heat waves that hit have some significant consequences. 2006, we had a massive heat wave that hit San Diego County. I'm sure some of you remember that if you lived in the wrong residence halls, it was a little warmer for you in September a couple of years ago, you know that some classes were impacted. Well, for older people or very young people, for people without air conditioning, that led to increased visits to the hospital. And the predictions right now, if you look to the right, is we may have as many as 7 times more excessive heat days, that is days of 105 degrees or more, becoming regular in San Diego County. And that means we need to prepare for that. And if you think about that, that's an energy cost, that's a construction situation, that's a health situation, it's a design situation. There's so many ways for us to be part of the story. So what do you learn? What we found when we talk to our students, and I'd like to hear from you when we have the Q&A, is that with integrated learning, the students really saw things from multiple disciplines. That project-based learning really gave you much more of a understanding of the real world and skills that you can use. There is some tension of depth versus breadth. You learn a little bit less deeply, but you learn more broadly. And there's also a little balance between skills and content, since we tend to lean more on skills than just pure raw content if we have a project base. From a faculty piece, it takes more than one class. We need to really plan on this carefully. We need to do more and more of this and integrate across every aspect of the curriculum. I'm proud to say, for example, that we need to start thinking outside the box. And so next spring, I'm teaching with Monica Stuff, and hopefully Allie will come join us. And we're going to be doing theater and climate change, theater and science. These are the ideas that we could do at USD that is unlike other places. And I think we need to be able to continue doing those concepts. We need to go beyond the classroom. Of course, we're, as you well know, well connected to the community, and we need to participate. We need to help faculty get involved in this. Some of them are used to doing it one way. We need to be able to think and do things in a completely different way. It's a little bit more chaotic when you're teaching an integrated class, but that's the fun part from my perspective. And it's more work, but it's more passion. So from my perspective, that just doesn't matter. Clearly, it's contributed to your success. I know that. It brings us across different ways. It prepares you for the world, and it builds teamwork and leadership skills. So let me finish off for the next 5 minutes and leave us about 15 minutes or so of questions with how have we changed from where you have been to where we're trying to go? That is, what's the new efforts, the new coordination of all these efforts? And that really comes through Envision 2024, our more strategic plan for the university. There's been a lot of discussion of how we can implement that. It's been 5 years now as we started doing this work. And for those of you who don't know, it's really as a tagline, because we need change makers. But really, if you look at the vision statement, we're setting the standard for an engaged contemporary Catholic university where innovative change makers confront humanity's urgent challenges. We just had a meeting yesterday focused on how we could be the leaders in dealing with humanity's urgent challenges. Right? Some of you are and have always been change makers, and we need to really emphasize that more and more. And keep the content and basis of Catholic social thought and social justice as the underpinnings of a lot of what we do. And for us, it's the pathways are all interconnected. That is, it's not just one area working in their own space, but it's really connecting what I do and care for the common home with the community work that's done in Anchor Institution. It's bringing in new ways of teaching classes in the liberal arts across the curriculum. It's bringing faculty and students and community members together to do engage scholarship and practical work. Care for the common home, I think, and my colleagues as well think that what it does is that it encourages us to pay attention to what Laudato Si sends as a message. And it means doing it through our teaching, our scholarship, our culture, and our partnerships. It means that to take into fact that the planet is actually going through a stress right now, and it's going to continue doing that, the climate change impact, that it's really a social justice issue, and it really requires cooperation. And that is the message that we need to remind ourselves all the time, that this is what we need to do. but I also think it's what we already do. It's just a matter of encouraging and supporting the people that are in that space on campus. When I think of care for the common home, and when I think the message that's important to get across is it's not just about faculty and students, though, not just about the classes and the research project. It's about how we deal with our finances, how we deal with our operation, our processes, right? We should be purchasing sustainable furniture and sustainable clothing on campus. I just met with students in Leva Chung's class that are doing a project on fashion, suggesting that maybe we should just buy clothes made by sustainable manufacturers as the merchandise we sell on campus. These are the ideas that students are coming up with. How can we really engage? Where should we get our food? How do we deal with food waste? How do we give away things on campus? And that means thinking differently about how we use our finances. It may mean looking at companies that are different from the ones we do now. It may mean investing differently. So it's not just classes and research, it's really what the university itself is doing. And none of this can be done in our little bubble. We need to be the force of good around us as well, which is why Anchor Institution is so important to us. It means working with our community, working with partners outside. I'm working, for example, on my projects with Mission Bay High School on projects related to this. We heard some phenomenal talks yesterday about working with communities across from Barrio to Logan to Linda Vista to across the county, on working with our community partners in a space to connect them to USD and give them the chance to hopefully even come to USD and be part of our community. So for me, care for the common home is more than just the environmental science part that is part and parcel of who I am. It's really looking at the finances, the operations, and the working with the community. So to finish off, what does it mean? How do we make it better? And for those of you who still work at USD, we need to have our messaging that's always there. We need to tell our visitors and our community and our alums and our students and our parents that we are a sustainable campus and this is what we do and this is who we are. That message needs to be loud and clear. It needs to be part of our orientation. It needs to be part of everything we do. We need to change policies that affect how we do business, looking at the companies we work with, finding ways to reduce our waste on campus, finding ways to save money in the world of where we are now. The more money we can save in business operations, the better off we're going to be in taking care of people on campus. We have to engage everyone. From my perspective, care for our government home goes from the gardener to the president. From everybody on campus could be part of this team. And in fact, part of the message of Campus as a Living Lab, supported by Trey McDowell in the Office of Sustainability, is that we want the experts to not only be the faculty. It could be the landscape people. It could be the people on campus that are engineers working on the systems. They should be part of the education because they have a lot to give. And so it really is a matter of engaging us all. And finally, I think we need to be available and have the administrators. Obviously, this is my faculty pitch, but I'm talking to former students. So we need to have more opportunities to have curricular efforts that are different, that are really going to give our students what they need to move on and be successful. There's a bunch of successful students on this call, so I hope we can continue doing that in the future. Thank you, and now your turn to ask me questions or quiz me and grade me like I used to do to you. Goodbye. Goodbye for the talk. Let's talk.
Thanks, Michel. Real quick, we did get a couple of questions when people registered, so
Sure.
why don't I start with those two? One of the questions, what are some of the best ways to advocate for social and environmental justice during these times?
That is a great question because we're seeing clearly that COVID-19 has a disproportionate effect on the more disadvantaged. I was having a discussion with students this morning. I think we need to be thinking about ways to give back, helping out in food kitchens, helping out and maybe giving clothes away for people. Because at this point, this morning it said there's a 90% drop in people purchasing clothing because they don't need it. But there's also going to be people who don't have jobs to buy things. And I think the fact that we are much more privileged than most, I think we need to be thinking more about participating in society from that perspective. From the perspective of connecting it to climate change, it's pretty clear we've done a good thing to the planet by not driving as much, by not flying as much, by not doing those things. And so maybe when this all is over, we can think about ways to be better overall, change our behaviors, right? Instead of going to the grocery store every day, maybe you go once a week like you're doing now because you have no choice. So I think there's a lot of lessons that we said we couldn't do things to be better to the planet. We've been forced to do things to be better for the planet. So maybe we can learn from that and do it because we want to, not because we have to.
Yeah, the great global pause. By the way, you mentioned the rainiest weekend in recent history, and that was the same weekend as the USD Wine Classic, which is an outdoor party for 800 people.
That's right.
Thanks for bringing that back. Another question from Abby Burke. How feasible is the net zero admissions goal for USD?
Thanks, Abby, for that question. I think that's a great question. We just met with SDG&E, as a matter of fact, this week as a potential partner. I think it needs to be pursued aggressively. We're building a new building. We have a very aggressive, for those of you who don't know, President Harris signed the University President's climate change agreement, and we have promised to be carbon neutral by 2035, which is only 15 years away. And so I think being at the forefront by having a net zero building, especially when we have a chance to build it from the ground up, would be a way of waving the flag that we're taking this seriously and something we can do. We need to get away from the mindset of building a 1950 style building in 2020. So I think that we have ways to do that. I heard from my colleagues that the graduate students in the real estate class just came up with a whole bunch of ideas on that. And so as I've told many of my students in the past and currently, the student voice has to be loud. You have more power than anybody else on campus, so you need to tell the leaders that we need to move forward.
Fantastic. You kind of answered this, but the only other question, so others are please raise your hand or speak up, unmute yourself. But the other question was, how does the pandemic complicate climate change efforts, both in terms of people's attention and the significant decrease in public sector revenues?
It's really interesting. I've been reading several papers about that, and my students just wrote one of their papers on that I have to grade now. Couple of things. One is we've had this positive blip. So we've actually seen, if you look at the pictures around the world of, Mumbai and Los Angeles and Italy with clean air, you can see the canals in Venice that are cleaned up because there's not as many tourists. And so from a practical side, we're seeing that I think we're clearly shows we were making an impact on the planet. So for the people who don't think humans were involved in making an impact on the planet, it's pretty visually clear. Two, I think we can do something about it because we've already seen that. However, there's contradictory evidence that just came out yesterday, the day before yesterday, that we've reached the highest level of CO2 on the planet ever, 416 parts per million. So you need to remember that the CO2 and the impacts of global warming are not what happens today, only what happens today or yesterday. There's a lag from all the inputs we've been affecting the planet, before this. I think what COVID-19 is going to teach us, I'm hoping, is really that change in behavior. We are really seeing the fact that we have to do things differently now. And the data seem to indicate that the planet is healing for a short time. The concern, by the way, is that if we go back to work and try to make up for the fact that we haven't been working for 3 or 6 months, that we take all environmental regulations off and just kick it into high gear. So we have to be balanced in our approach as we move forward.
Right. Well, let's open the floor up in case any former students or current faculty or anybody wants to have a comment for Michelle. It's not typically a shy bunch. Typically.
And my former students, if they don't ask me questions.
All right, I've got a question actually, because I am actually going to be looking into it while I'm getting my master's degree next year. So I'm going to be viewing how important modern technology, social media, news media outlet, and all of that, how much it affects sustainability programs and reaching out to the public. So I'm kind of just curious if you guys are looking at anything in terms of that for the general public or on campus to even get students more involved in everything.
That's a great question, and it's actually an important area. As you know, if you don't communicate the science well, either it gets shut down completely because it's over my head, it's too hard, I don't understand it. Yeah, we are doing some of that, and I think we need to do more. So for example, both last semester and this semester, Leva Chung in Comm Studies has been having her Comm Studies students work on environmental projects. So this whole semester in their global class, they're actually using climate change as the theme on how to respond. And they're looking at water, and they're looking at food, and they're looking at fashion, and they're looking at a bunch of things like that. So there are faculty looking in that space. We've just started with Andy Nosel and Rachel Blazer in psychology, and Andy, who's teaching in our department, a class on science communication specifically. So the idea of how to train scientists to be better at presenting the material. I think it's critical because we need to be able using new sources of media to get the message across. The lesson we learned that was most important, and it's going to sound like a no-brainer, but it's not done well, is that we need to be setting up our stories for specific audiences and not think that the same story is going to work for every audience. And so if there's a lesson learned in there, right? When I'm talking to a CEO of a company, it's a very different thing than if I'm talking to a 6-year-old. It's very different if I'm talking to a group of people who already are interested in the marine environment and a group of people who say climate change is not happening. And the biggest problem we've had in talking about climate change is we've tended to take the same approach. I'm just going to give you data, and I'm going to convince you my data is real, and you're smart enough to figure it out, and then I win. And in fact, that doesn't happen. So if I were going to say that the training we need to do is really work on audience-specific communication strategies in a very purposeful way.
I might, along those lines, recommend the actor Alan Alda has a podcast called Clear and Vivid, and he also funds the Center for Science Communication at one of the SUNY schools, I think in Stony Brook, and it's about how to teach scientists to communicate better. So, and I think they're partnering with UCSD as well. But
and they've actually Andy Nosel, who's a non-tenure track faculty in our department, actually went through that training through the Alan Alda Institute to do some of that.
Yeah. Another question, and I had this kind of a similar question, but Abby asks, how do we balance USD's focus on study abroad in normal times with the goal to reduce the university's environmental footprint?
I think Abby's feeding me all these questions because it's so much fun to discuss them. We have had a lot of discussions about that. For those of you who don't know, sadly, we won't have study abroad for the fall because of all the difficulties of travel and restrictions. One of the first things we looked at many years ago, and if Paula's still here, she'll know because she was part of this, we looked at the fact that we can offset. And I think that's what we need to do to be consistent. If we actually set up a formal program to offset the miles that we fly in a way that is both economically and environmentally correct, we could at least offset the carbon footprint. You know, we just heard yesterday, as a matter of fact, that study abroad is one of the key things that connects our students and our alums to USD. So I think that's one thing we could certainly talk about is offsetting our carbon footprint. I do think we need to think more about working in ways that could, potentially think about where we go and what we do and what we do when we live there. I think sometimes we go abroad, and because we can do it, we can live in nicer places. Maybe we should consider living in more local places, working more closely in places that might be themselves companies that have a lower CO2 footprint. So if we can offset our flights and maybe work more locally. When we traveled to New Zealand last year, we worked with a group that worked much more with local communities than staying at a big chain hotel, for example.
Paula just posted the goodtraveler.org, which is a carbon offset program developed by the airport where she works to offset your travel. Paula, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but please feel free to. And we have time for a couple more questions. If any of you want to jump up, looks like John Finneran there. We'll unmute you, John. You need to unmute yourself again there.
Yeah.
There
Could you say a few words about your carbon farming, the process of using farming to trap carbon?
So, it's interesting you bring that up. In some of our classes, our students are looking into that as, when we talk about our topics and we look at food and we look at CO2. I think the concept of carbon sequestration using proper soil techniques and working with farmers is a really interesting avenue. It's something we haven't explored, but frankly we should, because there's a lot of small medium-sized organic farming in San Diego County. There's a lot of people working in a smaller scale, and I think it might be a really good idea for us to maybe partner with them and try something out as a pilot program. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, 3 quick questions and that'll wrap us up. Do you think the pandemic will encourage us to spread out more rural than urban?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's gonna, people are used to where they live, and I don't know if the pandemic has caused that level of change in people's perspectives. You know, they opened up some places in certain states and we're right back to the restaurants and the bars and crowded all over again. I do think spreading out would be a really good idea. And if you think of California, there's a lot of open spaces. But then if we do that, we need to think about our transportation signature, because right now in Southern California, if I go live further away, I need to drive more than I've actually added to the CO2 signature. So we're going to have to be systematic in our approach.
All right. How do you see climate action being integrated into global economic relief efforts?
Well, you know, the results so far have shown that it's very hard to come up with a global model, or for that matter, even a national model. So I think what we're going to have to do is build it up in tiers. We're going to have to make sure we have a good local model and a good regional model, and then see if those can be connected. You know, can you just imagine if a country comes up with a really good plan and tells us that that's what we're supposed to do as a country? Chances are that's not going to fly. And in fact, a lot of the research that was done with the study of, with the climate change groups, was that local and regional was the way to reach people and to get people to do something. So I really don't think we're going to end up with a global model. I think we're going to end up with a work of local and regional. Okay,
2 more quick questions. First, what about resources for children? How do we educate children about climate change?
That is great. I can actually send it to you, Charles, if you want to pass on. There's a group that put, of the groups I was working with, 2 of those were focusing on K through 12. And so they had some really great resources. And there's actually a group in San Diego called Climate Kids Alliance. It's been working really well with the kids. They're now connected to the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. There's been a lot of really interesting things done with kids. So I can actually put you in contact. The group that was working in the K through 12 space has an entire website that's been vetted with a tremendous amount of resources.
Okay, and it looks like Nora Miller suggests the biggest little farm, watching that with your kids. So we'll incorporate that into the follow-up. And then Jasmine had a quick question.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Dr. Boudrias, long time no see. Anyways, does USD have a program or a major in sustainability?
Boy, I wish we did. No, we don't actually have a major or even a minor in sustainability. We have, however, by putting together the minor in change making, our department has changed the way our minor is set up right now. So the environmental studies and policy minor has so much of it, the way it's set up, really essentially becomes a sustainability piece. I have some colleagues I know on this phone call from the School of Business who are doing that. In fact, Norm and I and Simon Kroom tried to put one together a few years ago. I think right now, the way we're going to build it up is to try to have it integrated into more classes rather than having a major per se, so that if we have classes across the curriculum that bring it up, it won't necessarily be a major, but it will be exposing as many students as possible.
Okay, yeah, I just know, like in the business world, that the chief sustainability officer is a pretty important role, and I'm currently in the UCLA certificate program for sustainability. So,
that's a great idea. One of the things we have discussed is a certificate program. You're correct.
Okay.
Certificate program is probably the way to go, and I think right now it's on the back burner with some of the other things, but it's certainly not something we've completely ignored.
Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, very good. Dr. Michel Boudrias, thank you so much for your great time. Any last comments for the group?
Yeah, actually, I think Brittany asked if the presentation is available, so I will send it to you and you can make it available to people who want to take a look at my slides and both get good memories and nightmares for having you.
And we're also recording this presentation, so they'll get your audio background. Lots of claps. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and again, visit alumni.sandiego.edu for more, sandiego.edu/climate for even more. So Thanks again, and everybody stay safe. Go
Thank you,
Toreros.
my former students, for coming to visit. Appreciate seeing your faces again. And thank you, my friends and colleagues, for joining us.